So, Eric, there's a new movie coming out starring Simon Pegg. I like Simon Pegg. If you don't know who he is, he was in Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz. He's on The Boys on Amazon. I think he's hilarious. Like everything he's in, he's pretty good.
And I love Christopher Lloyd. And
yeah, he's in it too. He's in this movie too.
As well as Minnie Driver.
Now, this movie has the ridiculous title of Nandor Fodor and the Talking Mongoose.
It sounds like it escaped from Lord of the Rings.
And if you're not aware, it's based on a true story.
Absolutely.
There was actually a man named Nandor Fodor, strangely enough.
Poor guy.
So yeah, that's a kind of an odd name.
It is.
And he was involved in a lot of different types of investigations into the paranormal, supernatural, psychics and ghosts and things like that back in the day. But he took the time to investigate the story of Gef the Talking Mongoose. A mongoose or a spirit or a thing that lived in the walls of this little farmhouse on the Isle of Man. So tonight, that's what we're talking about. Gef the Talking Mongoose, also known as the Dalby Spook.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Close-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Spook's a weird word that I feel bad using sometimes.
Spook.
Well, spook does have other racist.
See, I didn't even think about
tone.
that. Man, why you got to go there for, Bill?
I know. I don't try to think that way, but it's just one of those words that now when I say it,
I'm thinking, old Halloween, spooky.
So Eric and I, we always take time to talk before we record, and I was glad I could bring this story to him. He said he found it very enjoyable.
I did, very much.
It is a weird story, which I had read about a couple of times.
I think it was the movie that kind of keyed you in on the topic.
The movie brought it back to my mind. I had heard of the story before. I'd read about it. And of course, when I see a trailer for a movie with Simon Pegg, I want to see what it's about.
See, I was like Talking Mongoose. That had me.
Well, yeah, no, and again, with a title like Nandor Fodor and the Talking Mongoose. But I had actually heard the story a couple times. I did a much more in-depth reading on the story for our episode here than I had read about it in the past. It's really quite a strange story. A little lighthearted at times, but also
I found
there's some heavy
grimacing stuff.
Some heavy stuff here. And even the character of Gef, which we'll get into, could be kind of cut up, but also very threatening and apparently dangerous even.
Kind of almost like a demonic entity at times.
Now this, of course, the Isle of Man, which is off, the coast of Britain. It's part of the UK. And for those of you wondering, why is there a mongoose on an island in the UK? I did find that there was a farmer on the island who imported mongooses.
I'm not sure singular, plural
Was
pronunciation.
it mongooses? I don't know. Mongeese?
Better than mongoose, I think.
He brought a bunch of mongooses to the island in the hopes of helping tame the rabbit population. So
yeah, they're quite the hunter.
It does seem weird for there to be a mongoose involved in a story in England, but that's why. And yeah, when I think of mongoose, I think of Riki Tikki Tavi, that old cartoon.
Kind of like similar to a ferret.
But they kill snakes. I mean, that's what they do. That's their business.
Well, and this one was even confused because initially Gef said he was a weasel, which is a much smaller version of
Well, he said mongoose. He resembled a weasel or a stoat, and a stoat is like even smaller
than that.
It's like a little bitty. I've seen videos of them. I mean, they're like ferrets, in a way.
But then he even said, no, that's not right either. I'm like the ghost of a boy, and then it's like I'm a ghost of a mongoose. And
well, Gef didn't know what Gef was.
I think he was a little confused.
And Gef didn't even know the extent of his own abilities at times. And before we get too much further, Gef spelled with a G. G-E-F.
Yes.
But anyway, you have the Irving family. It sort of centers around the Irving family. I guess James Irving was an importer of pianos, is what I found, and he had a pretty lucrative business. And then things happened, and sort of the bottom fell out. And so the Irving family found themselves in a situation where they needed to adjust their living circumstances due to the changes of James's situation, and needed to find a much cheaper place to live than where they were. And so they bought a place called Dorlish-Cation, and I may be getting that name wrong, or it will also be referred to as Cation's Gap, but that is just the name of the farmhouse, or like the Hinterkaifeck episode.
Yeah.
It's just the name of the property.
Not a village, a town, or anything. It's just the name of the property.
And this Dorlish-Cation was near Dalby on the Isle of Man. And the things that happened in this house drew the attention of tabloids and investigators, parapsychologists, ghost hunters. I mean, that's how Nandor Fodor comes into this story. And we talk
from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, we talk a lot about Nandor Fodor. Honestly, he's kind of a smaller aspect of the greater story. But because of the movie coming out, it was sort of what, again, jogged my memory and brought us to this.
Now, to the farmstead, I thought this was interesting because obviously in England, I mean, we have antiques in America, but they have antiques in England that, I mean, much, much older than ours. It was called an ancient farmstead when the family moved in. I mean, not that it was old, it was an ancient farmstead, which I thought that's pretty cool.
Well, and even the construction of the house was outdated. It wasn't in good shape when they moved in. Apparently, it didn't have electricity. They didn't have phone. The
middle of nowhere.
Yeah, like the only entertainment they had was a phonograph, I believe. And this is a family that was used to living in the, lap of luxury kind of from the sound of it. They were doing really good and then had to transfer to the Isle of Man and kind of live within their means. And so in 1917, couple James and Margaret Irving, they moved into the Dorlish-Cation, like we said. They were soon joined by baby daughter Voirrey, which I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Voirrey.
Voirrey.
And I guess they had a dog also named Mona. So I guess Voirrey was born after they moved. And everything seemed as good as could be. Let's put it that way. It wasn't great. They were surviving. They were living.
Peaceful.
They had a little girl. And then in the dark of night, one night, September 1931, James at this point is 58. Margaret's 54. Voirrey is 13 now. They hear what starts as a tap, tap, tap at night within the walls, which escalated into scratching and rustling. They knew something was in the walls. They didn't know what it was. I mean, it could have been a rat infestation.
I would have thought a rat or a coon or possum.
And that's what they thought, that it was just something like that. And then, they started hearing noises and it kind of resembled like ferret sounds.
Some gurgling sounds, they said.
They had these weird noises coming out of the walls. It was keeping them up at night. They're driving them crazy. So on October 20th, James and Voirrey finally sighted their intruder. According to the daughter, it was the size of a small rat with yellowish fur and a large bushy tail. James would describe it as, quote, a little animal resembling a stoat, a ferret, or a weasel, yellow in color with a body about 9 inches long, its long bushy tail speckled black.
Now, mongoose is much larger than 9 inches.
Yeah, they're pretty
unless
big.
it was a baby.
Well, they fight king cobras, right?
So Ricky Tikki Tavi cartoon there, yeah.
Now, James decides they've got this creature living in their walls. They got to do something about it, right? You got to do something. So he tried to capture it, tried to kill it. I think they used traps. He tried shooting it.
Pardon my French, but I think that pissed it off.
Well, yeah, they tried to poison it, but it just kept eluding him. Whatever it was, this creature was too smart to be caught. So rather than focus all their energies on getting rid of whatever this was, they decided, you know what? This is our new housemate. We're just going to have to live with it.
Accept it.
So the noises continued, but they started to change. By December, it almost sounded like a baby learning to talk in the walls, which I don't know about you.
That's creepy.
That is pants soilingly. Like if I hear a baby in my wall.
And it was starting to almost mimic.
Yeah.
And it had like a real high-pitched voice, I think it said in the articles.
Yeah, like 2 octaves higher than anyone in the family or something like that. Now, initially they called this little visitor Jack, and they became friendlier towards Jack, and I guess at a certain point, They even tried teaching Jack to talk like you would a baby.
It was like a parrot almost, mimicking words and stuff.
Yeah, they would use their words and it would copy back.
Well, again, like you said, I mean, this family come from, I won't say fortune, but a well-established lifestyle, and they're out here in the middle of nowhere with maybe a phonograph. It's not going to take much to add some entertainment to the night.
By something.
Yeah.
So they finally did teach Jack to talk. And Jack, one of the first things it expressed was he was very grateful for learning how to talk. In Jack's own words, for years I could understand all that was said. I tried to talk, but I couldn't.
I love that aspect. Yeah, it was just like, well, I mean, he didn't have anybody there. It was an ancient farmstead left desolate. Poor thing. It could have learned to talk decades ago.
One of the second things Jack expressed was dismay at being shot at. And of course, James did apologize, not knowing he had such a cunning creature in his wall. And then Jack told them, I prefer to be called Gef. And told them with a G, I want to be Gef with a G. And the creature introduced itself as Gef and said it was an 83-year-old mongoose from New Delhi, India in 1852.
Now, how in the world out of all concepts to pull and grasp out of the air, I'd like to be known as Gef, and I'm going to tell you how to spell it. It's Gef, by the way. Don't get that wrong, because you tried to shoot me and you already pissed me off. And by the way, I'm from New Delhi, India.
Well, and that's not even the weirdest way Gef explained itself. Gef also said that he was, quote, an extra clever mongoose, an earthbound spirit, a ghost in the form of a weasel, and I shall haunt you with weird noises and clanking chains. And also, one point when asked what he was, quote, I am a freak. I have hands and I have feet, and if you saw me, you'd faint. You'd be petrified, mummified, turned into stone, or a pillar of salt. And that, if you knew what I know, you'd know a hell of a lot.
Man, they need to get this thing up on a stage platform in like New York at the time.
No
they could have made
like,
millions.
The things he was saying. And apparently, once it learned to speak, it became obvious that he could speak multiple languages. He knew Russian, Manx, Hebrew, Welsh, Hindustani, Flemish, Italian, and Arabic.
Now, how does that work, Bill? He didn't even know how to talk until he mimicked this family, who I didn't find any recognition that they spoke these languages in the household, at least. He's, according to him, from New Delhi, India. I wouldn't think there'd be a lot of that language, those languages spoken there.
It was...
Has this thing been reincarnated over and over and over and over, or what?
Again, it's one of those things like, what is its origin? There were different stories. Apparently, he had been all over the place. There was some version of the story where he'd been reincarnated into this form. So,
crazy.
There was just a lot going on. Now, there were various claims. The Irvings did say that while, Gef was initially hostile towards them, terrorizing them in the night, insulting and threatening them, even throwing rocks, that within a year they'd come to an understanding, and eventually Gef became like a part of the family to them. He guarded their house. I guess he would come in and, if any stranger was coming up the road or a strange dog would wander into the yard, he'd come back to the house and tell them, hey, you got people coming. There's a dog in the yard.
Dog had just barked. Gef had come up and be like, hey, there's strangers coming up the west side of the alley down there.
Yeah, Gef could also sing and dance, had knowledge of cars, could play ball. Apparently, when he coughed, it sounded very human. He killed rabbits. I think the total count was like 118.
And he would bring them to help feed the family.
He'd bring them to the family, and they would even sell the excess. What they couldn't eat, they took into town. So they were making money. Gef was helping them a little bit, but Gef was also conscientious. He would only take rabbits when they were in season. So,
a law-abiding ghost mongoose.
Yeah. Apparently, Gef could perform arithmetic and transform himself into a cat. There was one anecdote where James saw a big orange cat kind of tromping through the yard, and he didn't want a strange cat on his property, so he went out, was going to shoot it, and he followed it, and it turned a corner, and when he turned the corner, the cat was gone. There was nowhere it could have gone. Then he heard Jeff's voice saying, "It was me all along."
He was a shapeshifter.
He would wake people up if they overslept. Apparently, he would take the role of a cat if mice got in the house, but he preferred to play with them rather than just kill them outright. So he had a cruel streak. They would leave him biscuits and chocolates and bananas. And when I say biscuits, they probably mean cookies. It's a British story. But they would leave them in a saucer suspended from the ceiling, and Gef would come and take those things when no one was watching. He would regularly go with the family on trips to the market, staying on the other side of the hedge where no one could see him, just talking away. He would threaten to kill the livestock of anyone who he considered to be the family's enemies. He was definitely protective of them. He liked to joke. He was known to take a ride on the bus from time to time, travel into town, and return with news and gossip of the neighbors. Apparently, he also liked to insult the bus drivers during the trips and steal sandwiches from their lunch bags. One guy related he didn't like the way Gef was talking to him and was just really running him down. And then when he went to get his lunch, I guess he'd had 5 sandwiches in his lunch bag.
Wow, heavy eater.
He said it was like someone had cut the bag with a razor and all the sandwiches were gone.
Oh.
And he said if he could get his hands on Gef.
It'd been bad.
Yeah.
Well, there was a book written, actually it says in his book, Gef, The Strange Tale of an Extra Special Talking Mongoose, librarian Christopher, I think it's Joseph, compares Gef to a Victorian music hall comedian. Gef's fondness for playing pranks and making what Joseph, the author, says, outspoken and irrelevant comments are a central part of Gef's enduring appeal. Now, the Talking Mongoose repeatedly lampooned the Irvins, comparing James Irving to a Dickens character or saying his head resembled an onion, said the author, Joseph. But Gef also, as Bill kind of alluded to, has this mean streak. When Gef once spied Margaret disrobing before bed, he called out the name of each item of clothing or underclothing as she removed them. He was spying, creepy, peeping Gef kind of thing.
Peeping Gef.
And
other things, like, again, when this idea of the mean-spirited part of Gef, he once told James, "If you are kind to me, I will bring you good luck. If you are not kind, I will kill all your poultry. I can get them wherever you put them." And on another time, he said, "You don't know what damage or harm I might do if I were roused. I could kill you all if I liked, but I won't." I mean, he could be threatening.
That's mean. I mean, that's...
talking about James. He did once yell at him as he was reading the morning paper, "Read it out loud, you fat-headed gnome." And he claimed to have godlike powers. Again, he once said, "I'll split the atom. I am the 5th dimension. I am the 8th wonder of the world." And then there was one night, and this story I really felt was kind of, there's a lot of talk about what really happened here and a lot of talk about hoaxing. And if this is a true story, one night after displaying the power of invisibility, I guess James started to feel uncomfortable with having an invisible creature running around the house. And so he expressed that they needed to move Voirie's bed into their room for her safety. And I guess Gef was heard to say, "I'll follow you wherever you move her." And then James said later on, quote, "When we went to bed, I barricaded the door with dressing boxes, chairs, and a heavy weight. Soon we saw the top of the door bulging in as if some terrific force were thrusting against it. But the door held. Then Gef's queer high voice said, 'I'm coming in.' A few seconds later, a heavy pot of ointment kept in the room crashed against the bedstead."
Now, see, that's kind of where I was alluding to, almost like a demonic possession. Yeah. I mean, the door bending in and barricading yourself in a room with furniture. I mean, this is as described, a 9-inch yellow furry little critter.
Ferrety thing.
Well, you're barricading yourself in a bedroom with furniture against the door?
Yeah. And one thing that I found funny was apparently when Gef would get tired of talking, he would just yell out, "Vanished!" and then go silent and no one would, be gone.
Leave me alone.
I thought I wish I could do that in a conversation.
Right? There's several conversations I'd like to do that.
So Gef became quite a talking point, not just in this little village, but pretty much all over England. He became popular in the tabloids, and so journalists flocked to the Isle to get a glimpse of Gef. Several people, locals and visitors alike, claimed to have heard Gef talk. 2 claimed to have seen him, with one reporter writing an article entitled, "Man Weasel Mystery Grips Island. Queerest Beast Talks to Daily Dispatch Reporter."
There's a title.
That's almost as good as the Eats Potato headline that I fixated on so long ago. But he wrote in the article that he had actually seen Gef. Footprints, stains on walls, hair samples were all claimed as evidence that Gef was real, although a lot of these particular examples were chalked up as belonging to the Irving family sheepdog.
The dog, yeah. The hair and different samples.
So in July of 1935, editor of The Listener, Richard S. Lambert, who went by Rex, and his friend Harry Price, a paranormal investigator, investigated the case and would eventually write the book The Haunting of Cashin's Gap. Now, they avoided saying they believed in what they saw, believed that Gef was real. They reported it objectively, but they also said they never did see Gef, who remained invisible the entirety of their investigation. Now, they believed that the key to this whole story was Voiri. At one point, so convinced they were that they proposed that they take her on a boat ride around the island without her parents, just to get her alone, to talk to her, to see if they could coax any information out of her. Now, while Voiri, she was all about it. She was ready to go. Her father stepped in quickly to say no. And I got to say, being a father myself, I'm not super keen on two dudes wanting to take off with my teenage daughter.
Strangers, yeah.
So they never were able to get her alone without her dad to talk to them. They did take some of the hair that was supposed to be from Gef, and they sent it to naturalist F. Martin Duncan, and he identified it as being dog hair. So they also took the paw prints, the tooth marks that belonged to Gef, had those examined by Reginald Pocock of the Natural History Museum, who could not match them to any known animal, though he did say conceivably they could have been made by a dog, but stated they could not have been made by a mongoose. So now Price did make a note of the way the house was built. They had double walls of wooden paneling in the interior rooms on the inside of an old farmhouse. So this created a gap between the visible wall and the actual
hollow
wall.
Space.
So a hollow space. And so in his words, it made the whole house one great speaking tube with walls like soundboards. By speaking into one of the many apertures in the panels, it should be possible to convey the voice to various parts of the house. And concluded, only the most credulous of individuals would be impressed with the evidence of Gef. I agree that the whole family must be mixed up in it, but there still remains the question of motive. It certainly is not to draw people to Cashin's Gap, because they do their utmost to keep them away. The motive for the imposture lies much deeper than mere publicity. Now, Lambert, because of this whole story and his involvement in it, would nearly lose his job at The Listener and eventually left it altogether as publisher, after successfully suing Sir Cecil Levita for slander over allegations he was unfit for his job because of his credulity in believing in Gef the Talking Mongoose. So here you have a guy who reported on the story, and he suffered for it. So.
Is that not kind of the reporter's job, though, is to go out and find weird stories that sell? And then if you write it up, we're going to smack you on the hand.
Well, again, it was the idea that he reported on such a crazy thing, Again, he could have reported on the story, and maybe if he hadn't kind of leaned into I believe, he would have been okay.
He did that Fox Mulder thing, got thrown in the basement. All that was odd enough, but things even got stranger when in February of 1937, Hungarian-born psychoanalyst Nandor Fodor, here's that unique name, I love that name.
Well, again, it's the name grabbed. When I saw the title, when I first saw that Nandor Fodor, I didn't even realize what the movie was about until, the Talking Mongoose. I've heard that.
Yeah. Well, he turned up on the Isle of Man to investigate, again, because of all the local newspapers and all the interest and everything. Now, Fodor repeatedly interviewed the Irvings, particularly James, the father, compiling a thorough account of Gef the Talking Mongoose in his 1951 book, Haunted People, Story of the Poltergeist Down the Centuries. English barrister and author Alan Murdy is an expert on poltergeists, having just recently contributed a chapter to the subject on anthology and Deep Weird. I think that was a small kind of magazine at the time. Murdy is also the current chair of England's Ghost Club, an age-old body devout to the study of spooks, in which Fodor himself was once a member. Now, having studied the club's archival records, Murdy says that Fodor had come to the creative Freudian-influenced idea around the origins of poltergeists. Now, hang on, because things are going to take kind of a little darker dive here. Ideas that eventually led him to Gef and really lured him into this story.
Well, I believe he thought that the whole thing was a poltergeist situation.
Yes.
And he was going to use it to prove his own theories about poltergeist.
The mongoose thing wasn't at the top of his list. It was, we have poltergeist. We have poltergeist activity. Now, Fodor ditched the theory that poltergeists were invisible spirits of the dead and instead suggested they were kind of a psychic manifestation of a person's subconsciousness. And he believed living people could conjure these real hauntings with only the thoughts of the power of their mind. These psychic hauntings were powerful enough to throw objects or levitate tables. Now, what Fodor did was to focus attention on the unconscious mind, explains Murdy, instead of the apparitions of the dead, or as they thought. Now, at the time, Fodor's ideas were very controversial. And I say at the time, I'm going to say they're still controversial.
In my opinion, I think he also probably laid the groundwork for the idea that poltergeist activity is typically associated with like a preteen moving into
absolutely
the changes of puberty and all
changes
that.
Of life and everything. Yes, I agree with that 100%. Where really it reached this controversial point was the Freudian concept, his specific idea that there was this link between sex and spooks. Obviously, that was not a popular one at that time frame.
That absolutely is an album title. Sex and Spooks.
Sex and Spooks. There you go. Now, I found on Reddit a post in response to an article about Gef the Talking Mongoose. Now, Bill is what I would call our resident Reddit referencer here on the podcast.
And strangely enough, I do tend to stay away from Reddit when I'm doing the episodes, unless there's something particularly interesting.
He's always coming in. He's like, oh my gosh, I saw this on Reddit, so I added it to the list, or we'll look into that.
Well, Reddit is like my jumping off point, if you will. It's where I get a lot of ideas, but unless they link to like an article or something, I try not to take, because it's still a message
grain
board.
Of salt.
Yeah, it's still people relating their experience.
And it's true. I'm more the YouTuber of the pair of us, and the same thing is true, obviously, on YouTube. There's so much stuff out there, but we pick up a grain of salt for a possible story and dive into that. But I wanted to try to impress my partner in crime here that I also can go to Reddit occasionally and get some little salt morsels. But I thought this would add a little bit more to the Freudian link that was a belief of Nandor Fodor, and who was, I think, Jeff's number one fan and researcher at the time. It makes the story definitely a bit creepier than one might have originally thought, and not so much as comedic as the new movie kind of relays it. On this Reddit post, the response was written by a Grenadine Sunshine. Now, they posted this, they posted this about a year ago, and this is in response to the Reddit link of the Talking Mongoose. And the publisher says, I read a library book about Gef as a kid, and it terrified me for some reason. I was so scared he'd come to my house, laugh out loud. As an adult, it's still creepy, but for different reasons. Not to get into all the Freudian analysis, but I feel like there is an abusive, voyeuristic, almost sexual element to Gef. Like he peeps in on the women of the house. He watches their every move. And he alternates between flirting and terrorizing them. Apparently, he would make moaning and groaning noises for hours, made comments as the mom undressed, which we alluded to, naming each garment and undergarment as she removed them.
Well, and seemed very possessive of the daughter.
Very much to the daughter. Now, Gef apparently told her she couldn't move because he'd follow her wherever she would go. That was the mom. And he seemed to enjoy to watch her undress. So that's a whole creepy different aspect. Now, I'm not sure, this is, again, continuing on the post. They say, I'm not sure who in the family was ultimately responsible for voicing Gef, or if it was a shared delusion with the family, but I feel like it points to something dark and abusive happening in the home, and some or all of them externalizing it in some way with this creature. Psychology kind of lends that they may not have even known they were doing it and really believed it was, very real. Some scholars, such as English historian Kate Summerscale, argue that Fodor needed a new case to back up his fringe theories, and that's where Gef really checked all the boxes for him. Now, along with this disturbing reference, I found another tidbit of information that I felt was related. The Freudian author Brad Stager theorized that there was possibly abuse by the father against the daughter, Vori. He notes that Vori's room had a lock on the outside and claims that was a bit more than unusual, and I would think so too.
Before we get too far, in all fairness, I once had a lock on the outside of my bedroom door.
Well, were you naughty?
I was.
Well,
I had a tendency to sneak out in the morning before my parents got up and break things.
but did you have a window?
Yeah, and I pushed the screen out, and then I found myself locked outside. And that was how my mom knew I was sneaking out the window, and then I got in trouble for that.
Oh, okay. Oh, touche. Okay. Maybe they were trying to protect Vori.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Like I said before we recorded, I like this to be a lighthearted story.
Yes.
This is a little...
This is cringe.
Yeah. Not to discount anything, not to take away from anybody's opinion or what they read into the situation. Most everything you read does not touch on this in any way.
Right.
So,
Yes.
But
this was a deep dive.
there is some talk, and we'll get to that a little later on, of some mental illness, possibly. So,
Continuing on, he said that also Vori could have made up the whole Gef situation as a cry for help, or more fantastically, that it was a projection of her trauma via this poltergeist. As far as I know, no real evidence ever linked the father. I didn't find any newspaper articles, nothing in law records saying that the lines were crossed. But again, I felt rather than making this a whole comedy special, we needed to at least touch upon some of this because it is some beliefs that are out there.
I think this says something about you, Eric.
It probably does. I'm a deep, disturbed individual, Bill. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. There's no real proof that there was an abuse, an angle, although it was suggested. Now, Steiger insinuates that the way the theory of the other researchers who visited the house was more suppressed, without concrete evidence, with this, especially the strong British libel law. If this is possibly true, and perhaps it was just such a rule out of the way area, as some would argue, so there would not be too many people that would know if the father did something, or it may just entirely be not true. It certainly adds a more sinister, evil allure to the tale. And then the whole aspect of a demonic almost entity that Gef can change into. I mean, barricading the family inside of a room with furniture at the door, and the door bulging and beating and scratching. So again, there's multiple sides to this coin.
Yeah. Well, in the end, unfortunately, Nandor never got to see Gef.
That's a shame.
And wrote him a letter, since apparently the mongoose was also able to read.
He could speak multiple languages. Why not?
But it was simple. I don't know that I have the whole letter here. It's just very short. But Nandor wrote, "I am very disappointed you did not speak to me. Nonetheless, I believe you to be a very good and generous mongoose, and I brought you chocolate and biscuits."
How kind.
I have never heard a more British, "You are a very good and generous mongoose."
And I brought you chocolate and biscuits.
Now, Nandor eventually came to the conclusion that there was no deliberate deception on the part of the Irvings. They weren't doing anything on purpose. He also dismissed his own theories on poltergeist in relation to this case. None of the family members appeared to be psychic, which is usually part of that phenomenon. Gef himself exhibited no truly supernatural power or knowledge, despite his own impressions that he did. Nothing that he knew or did could not have been copied by someone else. And allegedly Gef had been seen, photographed, and touched, and regularly appeared as a small furry animal, whereas in Nandor's world, poltergeists were almost always invisible. Always invisible. I won't say almost always invisible. He did come up with a psychological theory to explain Gef, and that Gef was a split-off part of Jim's personality. But apparently, James was an intelligent and educated man who'd previously enjoyed a more active life on the British mainland, like we talked about. And, after moving here, literally into squalid conditions by all accounts.
Bored out of his mind.
No source of entertainment. They were very isolated. It was so different from their old life. Driven into poverty, the whole family suffered from depression. And one psychologist who visited did diagnose James with split personality disorder. So that was sort of Nandor's take on it. This was a suppressed part of James's personality that was coming out, as it were.
I, for one, I did not check Jim or James Irving, the father figure. I wonder if he could speak the other languages that
I don't know.
Gef said he could speak. That's interesting.
Yeah, and again, Nandor said they weren't doing it for any wealth. If money was the thing, James later said that they would later sell the house for less than half of what they bought it for. So they lost money in this whole endeavor. They didn't make money on it.
And you said he was definitely diagnosed as split personality. If James Irving went out and hunted rabbits, maybe Gef was his alternate personality, and he would say, "Oh, look what Gef went out and got," while he was the one that actually went out and hunted the rabbit. Maybe that's why he was a law-abiding mongoose, is Irving didn't want to end up in jail.
I didn't think about that.
Well, sometime around 1933, two teenage cousins, a Harry Hall and Will Cubbin, paid a visit to a new friend of theirs named Gef. Now, Gef lived on this, as we said, remote windswept farmhouse of the Isle of Man. He was very shy, and the cousins could hear and talk with him. So here's another case of possibly family. The way it was worded, I don't know if this was cousins to the Irvings or just these two young men were cousins to one another.
When I read the story, my immediate interpretation of cousins was they were cousins of the family.
Okay.
But that could be wrong. They could be cousins of each other and not be related.
It was unclear.
That was just the way I took it. So these could be unrelated boys.
But again, it was another instance of someone else, hearing, seeing, and experiencing this. They said that he was very shy. The cousins could hear him and talk to him, but never saw their new friend. Now, from behind the wall, Gef would guess heads or tails on a coin flips that the boys would do. That was kind of a popular little gimmick, a trick that they would play with Gef, and said, ironically, the accuracy was almost 100%. So almost kind of some psychic abilities, not just a 50-50 chance. Hey, it's heads. Hey, it's tails. It would almost always be dead on. But soon Gef began misbehaving. The boys said it was almost like he got bored. Now, again, the story's not clear, but when I read it, I envisioned these two boys almost staying here at the house, visiting the house, and the Irvings weren't there at this time frame. So I don't know.
And that's why, based on the timeline alone, I mean, the
1933.
The Irvings were there.
Maybe
they had moved in the earlier part of the century. So
maybe the cousins stayed there when they went to town, or I don't know. It was unclear. But Gef began misbehaving. He was bored. He began to hurl insults at them. He spit and threatened the boys that he would, their words, wet on their head as they slept. You can imagine what that would be. Gef, it turns out, was no normal boy. Now, they believed it was a ghost boy in the form of the mongoose. He was a poltergeist in the form of a talking mongoose. So literally a little boy had died and for whatever reason had been reincarnated into this mongoose who did poltergeist type activities, but laying in bed and get wet upon your head.
Gross.
Not too many people could. There's a t-shirt right there. I spent the night on the Isle of Man and I got wet on the head by Gef.
Well, eventually, Gef's escapades would come to an end. Margaret and Voiry left the home in 1944 after James passed away. And by all accounts, things started to kind of calm down after James's death.
Yes. Kind of a maybe connection point.
And again, they sold the house at a loss because of the reputation. They sold it to a Leslie Graham, who bought the home. And he claimed in the local papers that he had shot and killed a creature. He couldn't figure out what it was. It was neither ferret, stoat, nor weasel. And he believed that he had killed the famous Gef the Talking Mongoose.
He was kind of proud of it, too.
Well, the body that was put on display was black and white in color.
Not matching the yellow.
And much larger than the 9-inch famous Gef. So, a lot of people weren't sure what he had killed, but they were convinced it wasn't Gef. And Voiry herself said that it wasn't Gef. Now, Voiry, I was surprised to read this, and I probably shouldn't have been, but she passed away in 2005.
Oh, wow.
Not all that long ago.
Terribly long ago, yeah.
And she maintained until the end of her days that Gef was not her creation, although she did have some of the talents in particular that others used to say had to be her. Apparently, she was a talented ventriloquist. Her father used to brag about her rabbit hunting skills, though he was very open about it. You would think if they were trying to perpetrate a hoax,
you keep that
you
on the
wouldn't
low
brag
down.
about that.
Yeah.
She said later in life of Gef, "I was shy, I still am. He made me meet people I didn't want to meet. They said I was mental or a ventriloquist. Believe me, if I was that good, I would jolly well be making money from it now. Gef was very detrimental to my life. We were snubbed. The other children used to call me the spook. I had to leave the Isle of Man, and I hope that no one where I work now ever knows the story. Gef has even kept me from getting married. How could I ever tell a man's family about what happened?
Yeah, and I come across that. She never married her whole life.
Yeah.
That was
weird. The fallout of this was just detrimental to the family. It cost them money. It cost them, happiness, assuming, that was what Voiry wanted in life.
Now, obviously it was different times, but we've covered stories about the ghost house in Indiana and different things where paranormal, especially TV series and stuff, have purchased. If you can say something's haunted these days, it seems to increase the value. Yeah. It's obviously a different time, but I'm really surprised with all the publicity and, with Nano or Fodor visiting and all of this that they had to take such a loss. But I guess, again, real estate law number 101 is location, location, location. And this thing was rule as rule could be, maybe.
Well, again, it was a dilapidated farmhouse. They didn't have the money to make improvements. Regardless of whether it was haunted or not, I'm sure it wasn't appreciating in value.
I don't know if they probably never got electricity and stuff in it.
I don't know. And again, to this day, no one really settles on one answer for what Gef was. Was it the daughter? Was it the family? Was it a ghost of some kind? No one really says.
Now, I did read with the 2023 film, which dropped, I think, September 1st, someone doing research for the film actually traveled to the Isle of Man, to the site, and I saw a few pictures online of the ancient farmhouse, and it's nothing now more than a few pile of bricks. There's really nothing. I wouldn't even call it a foundation. It's just kind of some stacks of some rocks and some bricks, and you could, if you knew what you were looking for, you might be able to spot it as a house place, but there's definitely not much left of it. So, Bill, is it time for headlines?
Well, from one talking animal onto more talking animals, from The Sauce by King B. Kirigu, dated February 28th, 2024. The headline is, humans could be talking to animals in 12 months with help from AI. So experts from around the world are using digital bioacoustics to capture the sounds and behaviors of animals that are too quiet or nuanced for people to pick up on, and they believe these will be used to train AI to decipher these communications into something people can understand. Groups like the Earth Species Project are expecting a breakthrough in the next 12 to 36 months. According to Aza Raskin, one of the project's co-founders, quote, "Can we do generative novel animal vocalizations? We think that in the next 12 to 36 months, we will likely be able to do this for animal communication. You could imagine if we could build a synthetic whale or crow that speaks whale or crow in a way that they can't tell they are not speaking to one of their own. The plot twist is that we may be able to engage in conversation before we understand what they're saying."
So what you're saying is the Matrix inside of the Matrix.
Yeah, weird cyber whales or whatever.
Cyber whales. Well, my headline is kind of similar. Talking about talking animals, I found an Instagram reference post to a group called Button Pigs. Button Pigs, one word, is a group that has over 28,600 followers. No, it's not like hogs or the Three Little Pigs, but rather guinea pigs. And apparently with the help of a little technology, a small battery-powered buttons in particular, that when you push, say, a single word, different buttons for different words, the guinea pigs have learned to communicate at least in some ways or fashion. Now on this page, it's a mother and daughter guinea pig, and they're shown countless video clips and as they go over and push these voice buttons to communicate with their owners. Now, apparently guinea pigs can learn many different words, some bragging as many as a dozen or more. But they're simple words, like one button may be food, one may be sick, one may be hello, just real simple, small words. Now, I know what you're already thinking, probably the same thing I was. In what reference? Meaning are these guinea pigs just randomly thrown in a cage and they hit a button every now and then and it's hello, sick, food, kind of deal. But it's more like an old gypsy fortune teller tale. Are they bound to get a few of them right when they, hit 8 or 12 in a row and you get a response, kind of deal? Well, according to some of their posts, that is not the case whatsoever. In some of the video clips, questions can be directly asked to the mother-daughter guinea pigs, and they come to the cage or enclosure like intently listening for their owner's question, and then they will turn around where the buttons may be on the sides or back of the cage. They're not like in the middle of the cage. The guinea pig will hear the question and then turn and go to the back or the side of the cage and press a single button in response. These little fuzzball critters would, turn around and go over and press the appropriate response is what's really got the internet sensation going. For example, one of the owners says, "Are you hungry?" The guinea pig would turn and go to the food button and then know to go to the food bowl as if it understands the full meaning. Are you hungry? Yes, food. And then go to the food bowl because obviously that's where it would expect to get food. It's a twist for sure, but I thought a similar tale in a modern day era and one I thought was fitting for tonight's headline.
So I take it have you ever seen the videos on YouTube of the dogs that do that?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I chose not to do the dogs because it was too mainstream, I felt. I wanted to get something a little weird.
There's one, and I don't remember the full conversation, whatever it is. It's my favorite. And I don't know even why they have the certain words that they're using. But I want to say like the dog wants to eat. So the dog goes to the kitchen, it's whining. And the lady's like, "What do you want?" And it goes over and hits the button, "Food." She's like, "You just ate. I'm not feeding you again." "Food." I was like, "No, you just ate." So it comes back in the kitchen and it whines a little bit more. And she goes, "What?" It goes back over, "Food." She goes, "I told you, I'm not feeding you now. You just ate." And the dog stands there for a minute and just stares at her. And then like without breaking eye contact, reaches over with a paw and hits a button. Bitch. My question was, why did they even have that button?
Why did you have that button?
So we both have pets.
Multiples.
Yeah. Well, I learned that today.
Yeah, we have a new addition to our family.
I have 2 dogs. They're, I think, 3 and 2. 3 and 2 and 1. One's a year older than the other.
We now have 2 dogs.
Yeah.
One's about 9 months and one is 6 weeks.
Mine are half siblings to each other. I think they have the same mom. But we have dogs.
Mm-hmm.
We both have dogs, plural. And my question is, how well do you feel like you can actually communicate with your dog and vice versa? How well do you think your dog communicates to you? Like, how well do you know your dogs? How well do you interact?
Well, mine's a little different than yours.
Yours are younger.
Both of ours are very young. Now, some of the listeners will know we had a little Bichon Frise that I adored, went everywhere with me.
If you wanted to talk about her,
Now, we had her for like 7 years. Now, she understood, I firmly believe, what I would say. She was very intelligent. She would go, you'd say, "Go get me the blue squeaky toy." She would go get out of the host of toys. She has the blue squeaky toy. So, like Izzy, when we had her, I believe she fully understood. And I can understand her just by looks. She would kind of give you the sad puppy dog face, or she'd bark or come over and like tap your leg if she needed to go out. Benji, my new emotional support dog, if you will, that I got, and who literally looks like the old Benji for some of the older listeners out there that might remember Benji. He is my absolute derp. This dog is as dense as possibly can be. I think he understands. He's a rebel. He resents. He does not want to do what you want him to do. And the other one, of course, we literally just got last weekend. Yeah. So a little hard to say. How about you?
Well, for me, I have 2, and I have Lucy, who's the older, and she's full-blooded Australian Shepherd, which is, by all accounts, a very smart breed.
Oh, definitely.
And she is. She was easy to train, but in your respect, like, rebellious, she won't do tricks. You can't get her to do a trick. Like, we've tried. All the conditioning, she won't do that. Teddy, he's bigger. He's half poodle, Australian Shepherd, and I think he might be a little slow. But, like, if I saw, for the first time about a month or so ago, I saw something that kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't ready for it. And we were talking about something, and Lucy came in, and she vocalizes. She doesn't bark as much as she'll just make noises. And it sounds really weird, but it's just her way of talking, I guess. But she, like, my wife was talking to her, and she said something about, like, well, go get Livy. Go get Olivia. Tell her to take you outside.
Which is your daughter, obviously.
And Lucy ran over to my daughter, and I was like, okay, that's just weird. And I said, well, Olivia was standing by the door, right? Yeah. She wanted to go out. And the lady goes,
trying to explain this to yourself.
And my wife's like, she goes, no, watch this. Where's Sean? Who's my son that still lives at home. And Lucy kind of looked around the room, and then she went over and sat by Sean. And I was like, okay, that's a little bit. I was like, hey, Lucy, where's mom at? Where's mom? And Lucy kind of looked around the room and like walked around a little bit and then went over and sat next to my wife. So, I mean, she understands what we're saying.
Yeah.
Again, with the trick thing, I think she's just too good for that. Like,
it's beneath her.
I don't perform for you.
I don't perform circus tricks.
Now, Teddy, on the other hand, again, I don't think he's the brightest dog, but I was watching TV one night, and I was never really a dog person growing up. I think we've talked about this. Yeah. My grandparents had a kennel. They raised puppies. So I was always taught that puppies go away. You don't get attached.
Yep.
And so now I've got 2 dogs that, are my dogs. I was watching TV, and I had my hand kind of on my leg as I was watching TV, and Teddy comes over, and he's looking at me. And he's a big, derpy looking dog, and he's got the curly hair, and it's all in his face. So you can't even tell if he's looking at you.
Yeah.
But I was like, he looks up, he's just staring at me. I'm like, what? And he's just staring at me. And he's sitting there on the floor. He's good. If you tell him to sit, he'll sit. He'll shake your hand, stuff like that. But I was like, what do you want? And he's just staring at me. I'm like, okay. Well, I'm watching TV. He reaches up and he puts his paw on my leg, like over the top of my hand. And I was like, what are you doing? And then he pulls my hand slowly to where it's like right at the very edge of my knee. And then he just sits there with his paw on my hand. He doesn't do anything. It's like he just wanted to hold my hand.
Just wanted to hold your hand.
Oh.
Some quality time with Dad. Well, my question, I love this creepiness, this aspect, yet for some reason, this whimsical story of the mongoose. But, we shared a few more of the sinister evil things. I thought, wow, the new movie has been made. It's more a comedic. What if we made a horror film out of this? You and I were like the executive producers. Money's not an object because, hey, this is blown up and we're making all kinds of millions of dollars every day from our little podcast here. So my question would be, do you think it would make a good horror film? And if we did make a horror version, what twist would you give it, or what spin maybe to the story?
I think it would be a good horror film because I think there are elements that are already horrific.
Yeah.
The pounding on the door in that one story where it was like going to come through the door.
I could totally see that on the big screen.
The voyeuristic, like it could be an uncomfortable thing even. Especially if you play up some of the stuff that was implied but never proven.
Proven, yeah. No factual background for it.
But I think in the end, like, I kind of have a tendency to go big with things. And I think I absolutely would give him the powers that he says he had.
Yeah.
Like, I will split the atom. I will,
Almost like a anti-hero kind of thing or something? Superhero kind of thing?
Yeah, like have it just be totally, like, create like Poltergeist or something like that. Like the movie, where he's just going berserk, doing all kinds of crazy, terrible things. And
he was a big talker.
And again, they talked about him going off. So I could totally see him like causing a bus crash or something, or
shape-shifting and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. That's cool. Well, for me, I'm thinking a more paranormal contact Blair Witch style version. I would low-key that, but then I would be like you. I would kind of really dial it up on the aspect, but I would change a few things. I would do it present day, maybe some high school or college students. You got to have those in a horror film. Mostly non-believers, maybe stumbling across this tale while they're in England, and they decide to go visit this house. But I would say the house is still there, but in ramsack rambles, but enough that it would be a shelter from the rain. And maybe they decide to do a seance or throw some type of maybe a Halloween party or something. And here you have Gef, the mongoose, and the movie would be done through his eyes. So you would be like seeing through the crack in the wall these loud, obnoxious, rude teenagers coming into your home. And
Halloween did that. Like they like the Michael Myers point of view of him seeing things, doing things,
and how it would upset him. How dare you come into my house, and kind of doing all this. And then I would have Gef not only wetting on people's heads, but like lunging out of the rafters, clawing their eyes.
Why is my hair wet?
Yeah, this doesn't taste right.
if your hair randomly gets wet for no reason, do you taste that, Eric?
Well, if it drips down.
Oh, okay. Like
it drips down. Yeah,
oh,
it's like,
what is that?
that?
Okay, because for a minute there, I just had this image of you like grabbing your hair. What is that?
What is that? Nom. My hair doesn't taste right. But then have, almost everybody die, maybe except for...
You have to have a final girl.
You got to have a final girl. And I'm thinking a younger, maybe the sister to one of the kids who died that night. And maybe Gef related to
take
that
Voiry's place in the story.
And then, because we're Hollywood, right, we would do sequels.
Well, you have to leave it open for a sequel. You have to leave it open.
The next generation, the new Vory, would come back as an adult, maybe paying respects to her brother or sister's grave and still leaving chocolate and biscuits out for Gef. And then the mean girls of the school follow her out, and they start being, rude and crude again.
That's the twist in the second one, is that the girl and Gef are on the same side.
Yes, you nailed it. So that's kind of where I went with it.
The final girl becomes the villain.
Yes. I like it.
I wish I could make movies for a living. I don't know where I went wrong.
And honestly, I never was much of a horror film connoisseur back in my younger years. I watched Nightmare on Elm Street and,
we watched some of that stuff growing up.
I wasn't really into it as much as I think you were, or a lot of people were.
No, my mom was into that stuff, so she didn't filter any of that. And in hindsight, she probably should have. I definitely had some traumatic experiences that were on film, but it was part of I was never taught that movies weren't real. Like, I remember having a conversation one time about how I found like scary monsters, like Alien was scary, right?
Mm-hmm.
My mom was like, oh, those movies don't scare me because they're not real. But something like Jason, a person following you through the woods.
Yeah.
So in my mind, like, yeah, Aliens wasn't real. It was scary, but it wasn't real. But Friday the 13th, there was really some dude out there killing people. And for me, in my mind, if a movie ended with like the text on the screen and then so-and-so, blah, 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 I always thought that meant that movie really happened.
Oh, okay.
So there were a lot of movies I saw as a kid that was like, my God, like that guy really chopped people up with a chainsaw?
Mm.
Like, it wasn't real. It was based on a true story, but it wasn't real.
Yeah, I mean, like Freddy Krueger. I mean, that was based on a true story.
Inspired by some true stories.
Loosely,
but it was.
See, I was more of the sci-fi kid, but I was pulled into like Jaws, Close Encounters of a Third Kind. Those were, to me, I mean, those were realistic, kind of the same aspect as you were talking.
Well, and again,
in my
Jaws
mind,
was realistic, but I live in the middle of Missouri, so Jaws isn't scary because I'm never going to get ate by a shark.
Yeah.
But Piranha.
Mm-hmm.
They got loose in that river in the middle of the country, and that was the whole point of and I lived by rivers. I went swimming in rivers.
Yep.
But yeah, I wish I could just I don't know, somewhere along the line, I should have been like, I really like movies. I should make movies instead of, I really like working on computers. Let me be a supervisor in a factory.
Well, ironically, like I said, I wasn't a horror fan, but I think I could definitely make some horror films today. Maybe it's my age and just some of the crap I've seen and encountered through the years.
Well, it's like, they say comedy comes from pain, experiences. Yeah. I think horror is kind of the same way. Like, you can become more effective at horror if you've actually experienced some hardship. And so I think as people age, I think it's just as you get older, you get better at projecting those things because you've lived through more, you've seen more. I had an idea for a story. I'm not a writer. I wish I was. I wish I was better at it. I probably would be if I would practice it. But I heard a story on a different podcast that I listened to about a little girl who saw some things under her bed, and they were talking about the bad things the family was doing, in that like the dad was cheating on the mom or vice versa, something like that.
Okay.
And they were talking about it as if the little girl couldn't see them. And I thought, like, I immediately personalized that story and thought, oh, you could make a really cool version of that, even maybe as a movie, with these little imps living in the house, and their whole motivation is just to destroy this family and feed off the
from
negativity.
The inside out.
And so part of it was like, oh, the dad lost his job. Isn't he just a useless piece of crap? Because again, I made it like, oh, I've just gone through this.
Plant those seeds.
And it was like, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because the subtext of that story was after the host had listened to it, they said, well, maybe this was the little girl's way of processing things she knew that she shouldn't have.
Right.
Like maybe she was aware of the infidelity, and in her own mind, she couldn't process it. So this was her way of dealing.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that still makes a very, like, as much as I don't believe in certain things, like I don't believe that she had little imps living under her bed that were talking about her parents cheating on each other.
I could really see that on the big screen, though.
But yeah, it would be a really cool story.
Well, we hope that you've enjoyed this kind of whimsical comedy, grim fairy tale of Gef the Talking Mongoose. Just another episode that you'll find here on Nightmares on the Lost Highway. Thanks so much for listening.
Hey, real quick, call to action. I think Eric would agree. We'd like to grow this Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Absolutely.
If you could, if you're listening on Apple, if you would go and give us a review and rate us. If you have some feedback, that's fine too. Whatever platform you're listening, follow us, rate us, give us some reviews. That helps get some recognition and gets our name out there.
We do have a Facebook page, Nightmares on the Lost Highway. You can easily find us if you want to communicate with us, if you want to share some possibilities for future podcasts with us. Reach out. We want to talk with you guys.
So there's a new I already screwed that up. First sentence.
Rewind and play.
I did like the outtake on the doll one, by the way.
Yeah.
Nightmare in the Lost Hallway. I played that for Livy. She thought it was hilarious. How long have you guys been doing
How many thousands of times has he said that?
For less than half what they bought for it. But nope. That's a dumb sentence. We will likely be able to do this for animal communication.
Communication.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.